Welcome to Culture Conversations, a podcast that helps disciples make disciples in today's world.
All right, friends, welcome to another episode of Culture Conversations. I'm here with my friend Mike Larsen. He's from LA. He does know Snoop Dogg. Just kidding. And we're gonna talk about a lot.
The value and worth thing, like I ain't got nothing. Like I can't bring anything to this. I'm preaching to a camera right now. You know, like this is so weird. Like I love the people. I serve the people. That's what I do. You know, I shepherd people. Now I don't have any people, and so it's just really strange. Like so, kind of an identity crisis again, and needing a little bit more affirmation if you want to tie that together. Yeah. But that led to a full-on, I'm losing it. 48 years old, and I ain't got nothing to bring. That's hard to.
Right.
You know, that's hard. So, yeah. So it revealed some things in me, and I had to get some help. Yeah.
So, and I want to talk on that because you and I have had a previous discussion about that and getting that help, and that's fascinating. So let's pause that. Okay. Back to your lead pastor is like, you're not quitting. Don't let these people speak authoritatively into your life. You need to pick several people who you trust. Yeah. God's approval is number one, and if he approves of you, then these other people get a much lesser, weightier voice in your life.
Sure.
Then what was the next progression from there?
Yeah, so I just, they hired me on a little part-time, it was like more like a stipend at the church while I was studying. They were kind of buying some of my time to study, and then I commissioned in 2009, became a pastor in the RCA.
Nice.
Yeah, and then they gave me, it was just more of an elder kind of pastoral teaching position, or discipling position, and more like a community group leader, if you will. Mm-hmm. Like, so they just gave me a stipend to do that. And then, so I faithfully did that. Jeff was transitioning in 2012 to Oasis, this Reformed church that we got saved in, was a replant of an old church. And so that's kind of Jeff's giftedness, is revitalizing churches. Mm-hmm. And so that he was off to the next one in 2012. And so he pulled up Pastor Vinny Hankey, who's an Acts 29 pastor too, in the lead position. And they offered me a full-time position, which as a kind of an XP guy, okay, or associate pastor. And that was just an absolute another left turn that God was asking me to take. I had a lucrative job, really well-paying job, and company truck. And I mean, we were doing great financially. And the job that they were offering me was like $38,000 a year and no insurance.
Oh man, and that's in LA.
No, we were actually, but it was Southern California. So, okay. But the area that it was the area of the high desert of Southern California. So that would have been okay for like maybe a single couple, I don't know.
But not for a family.
Not
especially if you're making already a decent wage. Yeah. And now you're going to take a serious cut.
Yeah, serious cut. And, but we really felt like God was telling me to do it. And so Sheila and I prayed and we decided to take the job. So, so January 2012, I started a full-time position at Oasis. Nice. And so, yeah, and it was exciting for the first month until I realized that it wasn't going to work financially for us. And so, interestingly enough, I had a friend of mine from a competing company, trucking company. He called me up and he said, "Hey, I heard you're not working for Jerry anymore." And I said, "No." And he says, "Well, we've got this position open." And I'm thinking, well, maybe I did make the wrong move. Mm-hmm. I had talked to Jerry before that. That was the owner of the other company. He's like, "No, I ain't got any other position open for you. We filled it." And so I thought, well, maybe this is it. Maybe I made the wrong move. Maybe we didn't really hear from the Lord. And so I said, "Well, why don't you send me what you got, what you're thinking?" He came back and it was like the same money and less work. It was just like, this is good. And so I called up Sheila and I said, hey, Tim called and or sent over the offer for this company, and it's really good. And Sheila's exact words were, Mike, I think the devil's trying to give you a job.
Whoa.
And I went, whoa. And she goes, why don't you just go to your elders and ask them for more money and tell them what's going on? And so I'm like, okay. And so that week we held a meeting just for this, and I asked them, and I told them my predicament. It took like 5 minutes. They came back and said, we'll give you more money.
Nice.
so I can stay.
Look at that.
Yeah. And so we were able to afford insurance.
Wow,
after
look at that, man.
Yeah. And so, so we did ministry there for 2 years. And in 2014, I was called to Encounter, another revitalization.
Which was an X29 church?
It was not at the time.
Okay.
Yeah. It was an RCA church. And so, interesting story there. They were without a pastor, and they called in the denomination to help them figure out what the future of this church was in Bellflower, California.
4 acres in
Los Angeles area.
Which is quite a lot of property in that area.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And so that was like, there's 3 options for that place, and that was one of them, was to sell the property and give the money to church planting.
Okay.
The second thing that they came up with, the RCA came up with, was revitalization. Well, apparently that church had tried that several times in the last 10 years, and it never equated to anything. The third option was a replant of a new church on this location, new name, new pastor, new core team. Like, let's get a new, and so they agreed to that. The people that were there agreed to that. And so the core team they had already, they had a handful of the 30 to 40-year-old folks that were born and raised in that church.
Wow. Like
really wanting to see a new life come to the church. And so that was really, really cool. So what had happened is that they were just filling pulpit supply for 2013, and I was part of that. And so I came down and I preached for them. It was a Palm Sunday, and the church was planted in like 1935.
Oh man.
Yeah. So I'm sitting there like thinking, what's going on here? This is going to be like their 73rd, like Palm Sunday message, I don't feel like preaching another Palm Sunday message to this congregation. And so I got down there and I was just like, all right, open your Bibles to Revelation 2. And I'm just like, we're going to find out who we are. What church are we in this? So I started preaching about the church in Ephesus and how they lost their first love, and we need to get back to our first love.
You weren't even the pastor yet, or were you?
No. I told him, I said, I'm not going to preach another Palm Sunday message. Y'all have heard enough of those. The history of this church having Palm Sunday messages are deep. I said, but you haven't heard one like this, I promise you. And maybe you have it, but I'm going to give it to you this way. And I preached Revelation 2 and really calling them to love their neighbors. You see, the church is a Dutch Reformed church in their denomination, and they thrived. They planted in 35. The church started to grow. They had like 3 different locations. They were given this property, these 4 acres, and they built this place in 1950. It cut the ribbon in 1958, and this church has been in existence since then. Well, those churches were thriving so much. I mean, their missional strategy was seriously have more babies. Like the families were all white, Dutch. If you just go to your church, that was your church, and have more babies, and it worked. There was plenty of money. Missions were all about overseas stuff and putting pins in the wall. So you give to missions. You might send some people on missions, but very, very rare, like love your neighbor stuff. You didn't really have to. I mean, you had some heathen neighbors like that wouldn't go to church, but they were just like, oh, well, maybe they will someday, you know? But they didn't really have to evangelize. Well, there's a lot to get into there, but there was like white flight in LA, where the community started changing in ethnicity and economically, and which drove a lot of the influence and affluence out of LA. And it pushed it east to like Orange County area, which is, and it was really the start of the mega church movement. These big monster churches, because they took all their money with them, big monster churches pop up in the heels of SoCal, Saddlebacks of the world, the Harvest, you know, of Calvary Chapel. I mean, all these big mega churches, Orange County, but they left like the working class with these churches, and no missional strategy to love your neighbor, because their neighbor wasn't like them. They didn't look like them. They didn't talk like them. They didn't go around the same social circles. They didn't even know how to engage evangelistically.
They were very other.
Yeah, they were very their own tribe. And evangelism was not even on their radar.
Here's what I found.
Oh,
he called forth Siri.
Yeah, evangelism, Siri. Evangelize, Siri. If Siri starts evangelizing for us, we're all in trouble.
That's right.
But it was interesting because there was several pastors that would come in to try to cast vision for evangelism in the neighborhoods, and the God bless them, the faithful that were still remaining there, were in opposition to that. And then it became like worship wars. They wanted the choir versus the band. And so the 90s and all the way up into the 2000s, it just started to whittle down. People fighting for the choir and the robes, and not wanting to associate with people that weren't like them. That's about as gently as I could say it. I mean, even in 2014 when I got there was one dude that would sit by the door. We had already changed the name. And
To Encounter?
They had changed it before I got there. So they tried to do all the dirty stuff that would make people mad before I got there, so I could just like start hitting homers, which God bless them. Thanks for that denomination. They did that great.
Right.
And so there's this one dude, and he'd sit at the door and he'd just say, "Welcome to Bethel." Yeah, it was called.
That was the old name.
Yeah, the old name was Bethel Reformed Church, and he'd say, "Welcome to Bethel, welcome to Bethel." And so finally, I just had to bring him in. I said, "Hey, man, you're confusing people. We're trying to bring new people from the neighborhood, and you're confusing them." And he was just so angry that all the change was happening, and after 3 or 4 years of sitting with white-haired people and hearing their stories, I understand why, to a point. But he was so angry, and he wouldn't change. And
Did he stay?
He didn't. Yeah, and that was kind of me a glimpse into like the culture of what it was.
The church culture, yeah.
And so it helped me. It was like the beginning of me like slowing down and realizing that there's a ton of history that has happened. You know, people were born and raised in this church and baptized in this church and got married in this church and died in this church. And all of that seems to be going away with a name change. And so all this history is going away with it. And so I was never sensitive to any of that stuff in the beginning. And so I'm just like, hey, you gotta stop doing that without like being sensitive to how this is hurting people.
Sure.
And so it was like that realization that I needed to slow down. And then I just started having coffee with a bunch of old folks.
Nice.
Yeah.
Being sensitive, listening to the stories.
Listening to the stories over and over and over and over again. And there was one lady in particular, her name was Janet. She was a fiery lady, man. She was in her 90s. She had been going to that church for 60 some years, 70 years. I think even longer than that, if I'm honest. But she, even in her 90s, she was like, you know what the problem is, Mike? She goes, we're used to change. She said, nobody's driving around in Etzels anymore. We just want to have value and a voice in this place. We want to tell you that this is good and this is bad. Like, we've experienced a lot. We got a lot of experience here. And she said a bad word, but she said, if you want to put me out to pastor after serving this church for 60 some odd years, I'm going to complain. She used the B word there. I'm going to complain about everything and the color of the carpet. And I'm like, I hear you. You want value and voice. At the end of the day, Janet wouldn't get a vote, but her 60, 70-year faithfulness deserves value and voice.
Sure.
And so that was a huge lesson for me, is to slow down and listen and begin to earn respect from these folks in the sense that, and you know what, man, it was the best thing for me because I learned to love these people. And I've never seen anything happen that long. Like, I was 47 at the time, and I haven't done anything for more than 2 years.
Right.
Like these people are faithful.
They stuck it out for a long time.
One place, a long time. And I thought, isn't the generational church supposed to be like that? Like, I don't want anything more than my great grandbabies to be worshiping the same God in the same place as me.
Yeah.
And that's what we were greeted with at Encounter. We had like 5 generations in front of us. We had grandma, great grandma, mom, daughter, and a bun in the oven.
Wow.
And I'm like,
that's rare.
It was super rare. You know, we're watching these old folks like wiggle down the aisle, and me and Sheila just looking at them, looking at each other, and we're going, this is beautiful, man.
Yeah. This
is beautiful. And what is everybody complaining about? And so it was super helpful to get to know these people and their stories.
Wow. And praise God. It sounds like you learned to, as Peter would say, shepherd the flock of God among you, your flock, you know, instead of coming in and wrecking shop and being like, I got the answers and I'm going to turn this thing around. Rather, it was like, I'm going to listen. I'm going to be gentle. I'm going to care and guide carefully. Yeah.
And that's not my style. My style is go, go, go. And so I'm grateful to God that I got some really good advice from the people around me to slow down. And then just some insight from even the mistakes I made with that old man.
Sure. Yeah.
Saying, you got to stop instead of let me stop and hear you.
Wow. Yeah. How did you go from this point now to this church becoming a part of the Acts 29 network?
So the Reformed church that I came from was an Acts 29 church. Okay. And so we, from 2009, when I ordained as a pastor, I was doing everything in Acts 29. Acts 29 was a hot thing, you know, and we were eating it up. I mean, everything that Acts 29 and Relay was producing was just really speaking to my heart. And
Dave Kraft, Bill Clem.
Yeah. All that stuff. And Dave Kraft's one of my good friends today, you know, and just ate up every one of the books. And so super rich, quick and good theology and stuff. Regardless of everything that happened in Acts 29, it just really spoke to my soul. And so when I came over here to lead this church, it was like, hey guys, this is the tribe that I'm part of. And I invited everybody to a conference in Reno, which was probably not the wisest thing because it was right. I mean, we invited everybody there, and then that's when everything fell apart. And so it was like damage control and everything. All this, I'm asking these people to come over and check out Acts 29, and then everything was just like, oh my God, what's going on?
It's like 2012, 13, 14-ish.
It was 2014. Yeah. So I took that job in 2014. And so, I was at a conference, and then they were talking about healthy churches, which was good, but most of it was like reactionary to everything that was going on. And so you could feel that there. And then of course, the buzz around everybody who attended that conference was always talking about the fallout and everything that was happening. And so it put a little bit of question mark with my lead team at the time. Like, do we really want Acts 29? And I'm just so stuck with their convictions and their theology. I'm like, please, let's pursue it. Sounds like they're gonna, let's just pursue it. Let's just go slow. I'm not gonna ask you guys to. And so the good thing is the assessment for me took me like 2 years. And
mine took about 2 years as well.
Yeah, and so that was probably really good for the church because we weren't committed like financially. We weren't really committed to anything. Like, but I was committed to this assessment process and what they were asking me to do. So I just kept digging away at that and a lot of back and forth. Of course, my past brought up a lot of stuff. And so, which I appreciate. It helped me deal with a lot of things. But the 2 years later, I took it back to the board and I said, I'm ready to like submit this assessment. And I really want us to, consider Acts 29. And I think they're going into a better direction. They totally were.
This would have been about what, 16 then?
16,
yep.
Yeah. And so, so I hit submit and 2016 became an Acts 29 church.
Nice. Nice, man.
Yeah.
And then a couple things I'm thinking about now. You've written a couple books.
Yeah.
5. One about to be published.
Couple. Yeah.
Yeah, more than a couple. Did that start in 2020 or was that before 2020?
So that was 2016. So what I was trying to do, I never intended to go write a book. So the first book came out of a sermon series that I did in 2016. And the attempt was to teach the church to have apologetic answers for their neighbors.
Okay.
And so what we did is we solicited the church of questions that they would want to ask God, and how
God.
Yeah, just ask anything about God, about the Bible, about anything Jesus, anything ministry, anything life, and so we solicited the questions and we got a bunch of them. And so we set out to do a series over the summer, and we ripped off R.C. Sproul's and called it "That's a Great Question."
Yeah.
And we set out to answer all these questions. We got tons of questions. So there was even a couple Sundays that we just did multiple ones, like the pets go to heaven, like the really easy ones, and then we took the time to really answer the ones that are heavy. And so the why do bad things happen? What's the point of suffering? And that came out of the second one. But what does the Bible say about homosexuality?
Mm-hmm.
That's a reality in LA, a big reality everywhere. What does the Bible say about alcohol? We had a 10-year-old ask, why isn't there any more dinosaurs? There's just...
It's a great question, right?
It is a great question. Yeah. And so, why did God flood the earth? That was another one. And so we set out to answer them, and it just proved to be really fruitful. We were approached by a publisher, and because the 2 chapters, what does the Bible say about homosexuality and what the Bible says about alcohol, went viral. And so...
Like on YouTube?
And I'm a nobody, man. I'm not claiming to be anybody. Like, I don't have followers on YouTube, but it just went...
What happened?
Went nuts.
What do you think happened?
I don't know. I think that they're just interesting questions. And the way we handled them, I mean, I kind of did preaching style to the answer of alcohol, but I did panels for the homosexuality one. I just didn't feel like I was the expert there, and so I think the draw was the people that I asked, and so that probably is what got the attention of people, and then it brought more people to the next one, which was alcohol.
That's shortly after Obergefell, same-sex marriage just legally passed nationwide in 15. So
right,
yeah,
and so it's pretty popular. Like so, and my angle on homosexuality was like, this is not an issue to deal with. These are people to be loved.
I like that.
Right, and we were very much, biblical and conservative on our stances on marriage and gender and sexuality. But on the panel, I had a gay man who's been at the church there for 25 years.
Celibate.
Celibate.
Nice.
Yeah. And so I I think the only juice that I brought to that was that I've had a conversation with him. We've sat with him. I've talked to him. We are friends. And I wasn't kicking him out of our church.
Right.
And that's what he was afraid of at our first lunch that we had. Because as soon as he felt like as soon as I found out that he was homosexual or gay, that I'd ask him no longer to serve, no longer to be part of the church. And he had experienced church hurt before at that church from the older pastors, the pastors from the past. And so he was just afraid that was going to be a repeat. And so, but his story is that he gave up. He just had that conviction that he loves Jesus and he loves this man that he was with, but he loves Jesus more.
Love that. And
so, wonderful testimony, man. Like, I don't know how many people are giving up those feelings for the church anymore. And so it's like, I got this conviction, like I would storm the gates of hell with this guy because he's sacrificing more than many, than most people in the church today. Because that's a big one.
Absolutely.
That's a big one, right? I don't know if Jesus, like I said, even before, I don't know that I could do this if Jesus told me to sacrifice my wife, like give up my wife for the church. And so, and that's not just about sex. That's about intimacy. That's about relationship. That's about community. That's all about so much that this man is sacrificed for the sake of not dishonoring his relationship with God. And so that's incredible.
It is.
And so I recognize that. I think that was my only part that I really had in that, but the panel was very informative too. So, yeah. And so the thought and idea of when the publisher approached us, I'm like, me? Like, yeah, you could do this. And so it took me about a year to get through the manuscript. And I just started to fall in love with the process.
Nice.
And the idea of like, this could pretty much help. This could help people. And this could be a resource that, and I didn't think that we were doing any like big sales or anything, but this could be a resource that we can give visitors.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, this would be
use
something.
Use it as a tool.
Yeah, just use it as a tool. And so that was the idea. And so we agreed with the publisher and we began to write. I got through the manuscript in about a year. I had a great editor. He was a guy that edited for Relit.
Nice.
And then Dave Kraft was the one that did my forward.
Nice.
Yeah. So that was fun.
I met Dave in July of 21. He's a great dude.
Great guy. He coached me for about a year, and that's how I got in a relationship with him. And he agreed to do the forward, and that was a blessing because he is just such a good guy.
Yeah.
And then we published it. It was fun.
Sweet.
Yeah.
And then you wrote another one. What was your next one?
My next one was actually second edition to that.
Okay.
So I didn't tell
more
you
questions or what?
Yeah, because we set out to do it like every other summer. We're going to answer more questions.
Nice.
And in 2018, like the hot topic was suicide. And it's like when suicide was becoming trendy. And so
that series came out on Netflix. What was that called? I can't remember.
Yeah, remember the show? And so we added 2 chapters to it. One was, or 3 chapters to the second edition. And there was also the Parkland shooting at the time. And so that question came up. We thought that would be a really good thing to answer. And then we decided to put my testimony smack bag in the back of it, an extended version of the testimony. And so we republished it, and we answered, what does the Bible say about suicide, and is it the unpardonable sin? And that's a tricky one to write because we know that it's not I believe it's not the unpardonable sin.
I'm with you on that.
But and we don't have, and God wouldn't punish people who are sick or mentally ill or battling depression and things like that would lead to something like that.
When they're Christians.
Correct. And so the fear was like, that would like give confessed Christians permission. And so we really had to angle that chapter on giving people more of a reason to live in the midst of hope, in the midst of mental illness. And so a ton of research for that thing came out, and a ton of study and a ton of prayer. and then the Parkland shootings too. Just like, where is God when maniacs are killing babies? You know, like, where is God? And so we added those then to the second edition of that book.
Wow.
Along with my
still
testimony.
relevant, right? Because every year it seems like there's several more school shootings.
Mm-hmm.
One just happened in Virginia with the football students
just
a
recently.
couple days ago.
Yeah.
And then a third book comes out.
Yeah. So I just caught the bug, and I started studying, and I wrote a book called Faith in Action, and it's based on the book of James.
Nice.
And so James is like one of my favorite books of the Bible, because James is kind of like me. He shoots from the hip. He just says it like it is. And
you adulterous people.
just like, yeah, I mean, your faith is dead.
Wail,
you know,
mourn,
like,
and cry, you sinners.
yeah, you know, and it's, yeah, I find that resonates to me.
I like James.
I do. It's so straight and forward. And then just trying to, I think my gifting is that in writing is like, I'm not a profound writer in the sense that I've got all these great, amazing ideas. I just make it simpler to understand.
Clarify it.
Clarifying. And then my writing style is super conversational. Like we're talking right now, it could be in a book. So you're going to get a lot of presuppositions, and that might frustrate somebody who's like, but it's like, whoa, that was awesome. You know,
Yeah.
You're going to get that in my book. But we want. I believe that God is whoa awesome, man. Like,
yeah, man.
You know,
Yeah.
so they become really easy to read and super palatable for anybody to read.
That's good. You're hitting the general audience. You're not aiming at scholars. You're not aiming at seminary students.
I will make scholars dumber. That's what I say.
All right, and then a fourth book comes out. What's the fourth one called?
This is just a little helpful booklet called Practical Evangelism.
Okay.
And this was something that, again, all of these things I create for my church.
Nice.
So I want people having apologetic questions that get answered to normal people with gospel answers. I want people to serve and to be active in the church like James calls us to be. Mm-hmm. And then practical evangelism is just a way to share the good news about Jesus practically.
Nice.
I think evangelism, the word, has like this stigmatism to it. It just sounds a little bit scary. And so I try to diffuse that by saying, hey, like, I've got this sushi place in Lakewood. It's called Mama Sushi. It is unbelievable. Chris, if you come out to LA, we're going there.
Nice.
And because you're not going to, and then I'm going to tell you what to get on the menu because I know this place and it's good. Mm-hmm. And man, we're going to sit down. We're going to enjoy this place because, man, it's the best sushi in LA.
Nice.
A lot of people disagree with me, but I don't care. This is my truth, right? This is my truth.
That's right.
What I just did for you is I became an evangelist for Mama Sushi.
Sure did.
And I
want to go.
Yeah. Right? And so I'm like, hey, let's break this down. Evangelism is just telling people about who you love and who loves you.
That's cool. And
so give a little practical steps through that, and teaching people how to approach their neighbor. And so it's like the 5 S's, super Baptist of me, but
you're an RCA guy.
I know, I'm really not. But yeah, so it's like, I ask people, like, first thing you need to do is search, like, who's your neighbor? Who is God put in your circle of influence? And then begin to pray for them and look. And then the next S is serve. Like, look for opportunities to serve your neighbor, whoever that is. Mm-hmm. And so you could just develop some relational equity with them.
Yeah.
And relational equity is like any other equity. The more you invest, right, the more people will trust you, and so know that you love them. I mean, so people are not projects; they're people.
That's right. And
so people that need to be loved and served. And so look for ways to serve them, and it can be simple as taking the trash cans back up for them, or letting them borrow some stuff in the house, or I cut my neighbor's lawn. She's an older lady.
That's cool.
She doesn't get out much, like stuff like that. And just had an opportunity to pray for her and her husband. Her husband's dying.
Nice.
So stuff like that. So that leads to the next one is strengthen. And so look for opportunities to really strengthen. My neighbor's husband is passing away. They've got hospice in there and all those things. And so I want to do everything I can to serve them, and in a tangible way. And so through prayer and through meals and through whatever I can do. Maybe your neighbor lost his job and so they need groceries or something, something that you could strengthen them with. And then I believe through this, this is what's developing relational equity. And through that, God's going to open up opportunities for you to share your faith.
That's good.
That's the next S. And so why do we do all this stuff? We do this because God loved us. We love because God loved us first. We serve because God served us first. And then, I get in there and I talk real evangelistically. Sorry for the word, but there's a moment there where we're going to tell people about Jesus.
Yeah, it's gospel time.
It's gospel time, right? And so this is, and I try to make that as easy and as palatable and as deliverable as possible. And then we believe that God is going to save people. When the gospel's being preached, the Holy Spirit is going to regenerate people's hearts and their neighbors and their friends and their loved ones and are going to be saved. And then so the last S is to send. We're sending them to do the same exact thing because we want to see more people come to faith in Jesus.
It's good, man. It's helpful for people. It's a easy
20 pages
alliteration there. Oh, that's even easier.
20 pages, man.
That's
I just gave it to you. You could just
All right, and then your last one that's coming out, the 10th of December, right?
There's one before that.
Oh, you got another one?
Yeah.
What is it?
I thought you knew that one.
The Esther one? Is that the one we're talking about?
Esther's the new one.
Yeah, so
the
what's
one
the
that's
other one I'm
unpublished,
missing?
but the one before that is called Uncomfortable Grace. And this one was interesting too. Like, we had in 2019, we had prepared the year of sermons for 2020.
Okay.
And so coming out of Easter the plan was to go 4 weeks in the book of Job. And where is God in our suffering? Right? Where is God in the midst of suffering? And then COVID hits, and it just like, do we do this? And so we're talking to the elders and praying, like, do we really want to go at this with everything going on in the world right now and everything stopping? So the answer was yes.
Okay.
Let's do it. Let's do it and use this as an opportunity to talk about suffering. And so we didn't want to really capitalize on COVID because we didn't know much about COVID. And there was a ton of people sick, but so what we decided to do was just survey a few families that have went through tremendous suffering to like kind of no fault of their own. That makes sense? And so we had people on each sermon come up and testify to how suffering entered their life.
Wow.
And these are people that, like I said, this is a church that has a lot of history. And these are people that have been born and raised in this church, 50 years in the church right now, right? And so the first couple was Chris and Nicole. Chris is an elder in my church. Nicole is the children's director in my church full time. They were high school sweethearts. They did everything to honor God in their marriage, before marriage, and wonderful people, love the Lord. Again, and then when all of their friends were getting married and getting ready to have kids, and they were getting married, and they were trying to have kids, they couldn't. They tried, but they were infertile, and so suffering into their life through infertility.
Yeah.
And so I told their story, and just kind of paralleled the book of Job through that, and just kind of said, like talked about the mystery of suffering and what God is doing in the mystery of suffering. And so there's a lot of parallels there. There's a lot of friends in Nicole's life that was trying to give advice, like Job's friends.
Yeah. His bad counsel.
Yeah, totally bad counsel that really hurt them in the midst of that. And so if those chapters could actually help people be more sensitive to people's pain and things like that. And so we did Carol and Milt Gilman in the book, and Carol has had 5 cancer diagnoses, a mastectomy, remission, and then next one comes, and the remission, next one comes. And these are just godly people that have been in that church for 60 years, 70 years. I mean, just amazing people that you'd never think, like, what in the world? Like, they don't deserve this. Why did suffering enter their life? So we tell their story. Ironically, before we published the book, Milt, who was 78 years old, spry, he had a 20-yard lawn mowing business that he did every week. Mm-hmm. He gets sick, contracts COVID, 17 later is dead in a hospital with nobody can visit him. Mm. And so we added that a little bit into the story too, just like where is God in the midst of this suffering? And then we shared several other examples of people in our church that suffering entered in their life. But those two just off the top.
What has that book in particular done for people? Have people really benefited from that?
Yeah, I called it uncomfortable grace. Not that grace is like God's grace is uncomfortable, but uncomfortable suffering can be the catalyst to seeing God's grace, to experiencing God's healing grace, God's saving grace, God's and that has been super helpful for a lot of people. They didn't because I think a lot of people give up on God, and because God is the therapeutic God, or it's a God that they made up in their own image. Mm-hmm. It's a God that wouldn't want their kids to suffer but prosper.
Right.
And so we make that connection with Jesus and God's intention for suffering. Not that anybody wants to suffer. We want to wish suffering on people, but God can use our suffering for his glory and our good. And that can become a catalyst to make us more like Christ and strengthen our faith, not weaken it. And so we just have real conversations in the book about how suffering is not the lack of God's love or care for us, but suffering can actually lead us into a closer, more dependent relationship with God, that a God who promises us that one day there will be no more suffering, no more pain.
Good. The God who entered in to our suffering and pain and darkness. Yeah, that's good. Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that book, because I
didn't see it on the list. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's good. And then we have the new one coming out on December 10th on Esther.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So again, just another book written out of series that we've preached on. The book of Esther doesn't mention God in it at all. And so I live in a culture and a society right now where it just seems it's increasingly becoming more godless. And when I look at the news, you just mentioned that there's another shooting. Politically, everybody's divided. When you turn on the news, they're just set dead against you, and they're pitting against you, and everything is just another way that they can get you to hate each other around you. And it's just like, where is God in all this, right? And Esther's unique again, that it doesn't mention him at all, but God uses this little girl and her uncle to do extraordinary things to preserve God's people and advance his kingdom. Yeah. And the famous line is that, Esther, perhaps you were born for such a time as this, right? Could we actually, even in the midst of COVID and political tension and riots and racial tension in our world and everything that we're facing, wars in Ukraine, and can we really still believe that God is orchestrating things? And can we have enough faith to believe that God could actually use people like, not just pastors like you and me, but ordinary people, ordinary people to do extraordinary things?
That's right.
And so I think that is still true.
Me too.
And that God wants to use people right where he has us. And perhaps, this will give us, this will encourage us even in the midst of everything that we are facing and living in and going through, to trust in God. That there's opportunities for Christians still,
Right.
when everybody's getting canceled, that there's opportunities for people that stand for truth. There's opportunities for people that stand for Jesus, that love their neighbor, that even love their politicians in a way that they're trusting not in their politicians,
right.
but in God for
That's
favor,
right.
for favor in the midst of the conversation. So let's enter the cities and the governments. Christians don't need to retract right now. You know, if God is calling you, you need to get in and trust in Him for the favor and the outcomes, because the book of Esther will encourage you that it goes really well. And for them.
Especially when the odds seem stacked against you.
100%, right? And so, yeah, it's an interesting book. And so I parallel, there's no real parallel stories, but how I end each chapter is I answer the question, how does Jesus write us into His story?
Nice.
Now. And so we just kind of survey the story of Esther in a way that, again, I just make it simpler to understand. And then we answer that question, how does Jesus write us into His story?
Man.
Yeah.
Sounds great. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, man.
So all these books are available on Amazon. People
Yeah.
can go on and grab a copy, and I would encourage you all to do so.
Thank you.
And then one last thing, brother, before we end this. You did mention in our conversation just before we started recording that you're doing some stuff with the Gideons again.
Yeah.
And tell us about that.
That was pretty cool. It was just a cold call from somebody from the Gideons that asked me to come to Florida to do another convention. And one of their conventions, it was their international convention, which I didn't really realize. My experiences was that these are little conventions that encourage a handful of people. But this
What
one,
do you mean by a handful of people? 100, 200 people?
Yeah. And so that's what I was priming for. But I got there and I didn't even understand the magnitude of this until I went backstage. I was going to speak Saturday morning, and I went backstage at 8 in the morning, and they had these sound booths, and there must have been 150 of them.
Wow.
And they were all stamped with names of countries, Spain, South Korea, and these people were manned in all these booths all over the world translating. And then I step out on the stage, I almost fell over. There was like 2,500 people in the audience. And I shared my testimony. It's on my website, mikelarsen.org, and on YouTube. It's the 2021, I can't remember, mikelarsen.org. But it was just an incredible, cool moment for me to share my testimony. And then that, of course, everybody that was there were Gideons from all other states. And so then I was getting asked to come and to the other states. My only caveat this time was that I have to bring my wife, or we're not going.
Love it, man. So she's good with that.
Oh, she was good with that. She's like, well, I hope New York calls, and I hope DC calls, and I hope, and so we did about a half a dozen of them at the beginning of the year. And so it's super fun.
That's good, man.
This is a ministry that is in decline in America. And so if Sheila and I can give up our time to go and encourage these folks who are, the average age is in their 70s, to encourage them to continue to serve the Lord in that capacity.
Giving out Bibles is a huge thing, man.
Yeah.
It really is.
It gets a little jaded, or at least shot down from Christian culture today, because of course we know that it needs to come with relationship and demonstration. And I understand that, but these folks have been faithful, and God's going to bless that. And so they don't know any better. And they are going to countries that they're handing out millions of these Bibles. And so I just want to encourage them to continue, and it did have a lasting change in my life.
Yeah, man.
Absolutely.
And God uses His word.
He does.
He really does. Man, thank you so much for spending this time and telling your story, brother, and sharing about your books and your life. We really appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate you. Thank you, man, for the opportunity.
Anything else you want to say to the listeners, watchers before we? What's your church's website?
So it's encounterccb.org.
Okay.
My personal website is mikelarsen.org, and you guys can check that out.
You on social media? If people want to like hit you up on Twitter, Instagram, anything?
I'm not really big on social, but
Okay.
I mean, I have like Instagram and stuff like that, but I'm not putting content out there. I will start promoting the Esther book here soon, so love for you guys to get a hold of that. But if you guys need to reach me on my website, you want bulk orders, you want whatever, we're giving you guys a cost. We're not trying to make a bunch of money.
That's sweet, man.
We just want to help the church.
It's generous.
Yeah.
Thanks, brother. Thanks for your time.
Bless you, man.
Yeah.